Hey traders, it's John Fortune here of this week's weekly Forex Forecast. I hope you're having a great weekend. Let's kick off with the DXY as we always do. Last week we rallied to the upside in the DXY and we took out the previous high, making a higher high, but we did so with less than a pip. I mean, this was only just a new high in the DXY. And then we had the inflation data coming out of the US last week, which showed disinflation, that is a reduction to the level of inflation. And as a result, we started to see the dollar index selling off as traders viewed this as a sign that the Fed could keep monetary policy loose for a little bit longer and there was no rush to tighten or raise interest rates all the time inflation is starting to peak and come lower. So as a result of that, we saw the DXY selling off. However, we are still structured to the upside in the DXY. We are more or less bullish to neutral because if you look at where the DXY is, it's kind of in a range. There's choppy price action really ever since the start of July here. You can see we haven't really gone anywhere. So I do go into next week with a bullish to neutral bias on the dollar. It's worth noting as well that August historically tends to be a fairly quiet month in terms of trading activity. And although going to next week with a bullish to neutral bias on the dollar, and I will be looking at dollar strength setups next week, with the dollar only really bullish to neutral and August being a generally speaking quiet trading month, I do think it's a good policy as it currently stands to pick the best setups that you see and reduce the amount of risk taken in the markets until we start to see the markets moving again and providing clear direction, and with that of course clear trading opportunities. So going into next week, I do view this pullback as an opportunity to look for further advances in the DXY. I'm going to be looking up towards the next key of resistance, the upside and the target set at the 93.42. The line in the sand here where I would start to turn bearish is the 91.96, and especially if we break this low down here, as this will confirm a double top reversal in the DXY. As I said, as it stands, we are still bullish to neutral in the DXY. Euro dollar. Now last week I was also looking for dollar strength setups and we were looking for a move into the 1.1705 in euro dollar last week. We came down and we missed this target just by a pip. So for anybody who wasn't involved in this last week, this pullback now represents a great opportunity to once again start to look for bearish reversals in this market. We're going to be looking down towards the target set from last week at the 1.1705. Aussie dollar. In last week's video, we were looking for a pullback in this market towards the 0.74120, and this was an opportunity to start to look for short positions to the downside. All we did really was correct last week as we pulled back. So very simply put, for anybody not involved from last week, any continued pullback in this area is an opportunity to start to look for bearish setups. I'm going to be looking down towards the next key of support to the downside of the target set, the 0.7290. Next is US dollar Swiss franc. Now US dollar Swiss franc has been out of the weekly forecast recently because the dollar has been quite strong and the Swiss franc has been quite strong. However, we did see the Swiss franc rolling over last week and it is not as strong as it has been, and we've started to see at the very least a pause in that rally in the Swiss franc. So going into this week with the weakening of the Swiss franc and also the strengthening of the dollar, I do like US dollar Swiss franc to the upside. We did sell off quite hard last week, but as it stands, I just view this as a pullback. Any continued sell-off in this market is going to be viewed as an opportunity to start to look for bearish reversals up towards the next key of resistance, the upside and the target set, the 0.9251. Next is pound dollar. Now pound dollar is a market that I was looking further declines to the downside last week, and very similar to euro dollar, we stopped just shy of the target set from last week. So very simply put, any continued pullback in pound dollar is simply going to be viewed as another opportunity to start to look for bearish reversals down to the next key of support to the downside of the target set, the 1.3788, and if we break through here, we're going to be looking down towards target 2 at the 1.3690. Next is crude oil. Now crude oil is a market that I've been highlighting to the downside in previous videos, and even after this large bounce to the upside, I did note crude oil was still bearish. We did come down quite hard over the last couple of weeks, and last week we took out both targets, turning almost to the pip at the second target here at the 65.35. Going into this week, I am still bearish on crude oil, and any continued pullback as we're currently getting is simply viewed as another opportunity to look for bearish reversals in this market down towards the next key of support to the downside of the target set at the 64.05. Now, interestingly, although we've been selling off in crude oil, this has not yet fed through to the Canadian dollar pricing. And I do think this week we could start to see that weakness in the Canadian dollar as the price of the Canadian dollar starts to catch up with this decline in crude oil. So the Canadian dollar and weakness in the Canadian dollar is certainly something I'll be keeping my eye on next week. With that in mind, the next market that I like is USD-CAD. Now, this is an interesting market and one to watch next week because although we've had the DXY strengthening and crude oil selling off, USD-CAD has gone nowhere. You can see we've pretty much just been moving sideways in this market. So going into next week, something I'm going to be looking for is for USD-CAD to catch up with the recent appreciation in the dollar and also the sell-off in crude oil. And if we look at this technically, you can see we seem to be forming an inverse head and shoulders pattern here, and we're in the right shoulder. So any continued pullback in this market is going to be viewed next week as an opportunity to look for bullish reversals up towards the next key resistance, the upside, the target set at the 1.2672. The next CAD pair I like is CAD yen. Now, last week we broke above the line in the sand and then we broke back down below it in CAD yen. This market is still bearish, and again, if we're going to get the Canadian dollar catching up with the recent sell-off in crude oil, this is going to be a market to watch going into next week. So very simply put, any pullback towards the 88.20 is going to be viewed as an opportunity to start to look for bearish setups once again. And any bearish setups in this market, we're going to be looking down towards the next key of support, downside the target set, the 86.19. And the final CAD pair I like going into next week is New Zealand CAD. Now, we have had a big rally to the upside in New Zealand CAD, and we've started to flag this correction here is setting up as a continuation pattern to the upside in this market, and especially once again, as I said, if we start to get the sell-off in the Canadian dollar, we're going to see this market rising to the upside as well. So any continued pullback in this market is simply viewed as an opportunity to look for bullish reversals up towards the next key of resistance, the upside, the target set, the 0.8906. The next Forex pair we're going to look at is Aussie Yen. Now, this is a market I've been highlighting in previous weekly Forex forecasts to the downside, and it is one of my favorite shorts going into next week because it has really failed to rally, even as we've seen the Australian dollar rising somewhat and correcting to the upside against, for example, the Swiss franc. This market has gone nowhere, and I do think next week we are going to start to see this selling off and continue to the downside. As it stands, you can see we're forming a head and shoulders pattern here, so any pullback in this market next week is going to be viewed as a great opportunity to start to look for bearish reversals down to the next key of support to the downside and the target set at the 79.80. Next is Euro Yen. Now, all of the yen markets look quite good going into next week. Yen strength is something I'm going to be keeping an eye out for, and you can see this Forex pair, very similar to Aussie Yen, is already starting to sell off to the downside. We're breaking out of this triangle type pattern. What I would really like to see is, especially if this triangle pattern failed next week, any pullback towards the 130.410 is going to provide better risk-to-reward setups in this market, and any pullback is going to be used as an opportunity to look for bearish reversals down to the next key of support to the downside and the target set at the 128.62. And the final yen pair that I like is pound yen. Now, pound yen has been out of the forecast recently, but last week it did reverse, posting this double top reversal at the line in the sand at the 153.11. So very simply put, going into this week, I do view this as a market which is set for further declines. Any pullback in this Forex pair is going to be viewed as an opportunity to look for bearish reversals down to the next key of support to the downside and the target set at the 149.99. And the final Forex market we're going to look at before moving on to stocks, gold, silver, Bitcoin is Aussie New Zealand. Now, Aussie New Zealand is not regularly featured in the weekly Forex forecast videos because the Australian dollar and the New Zealand dollar tend to move together. We are seeing a divergence of that now, and you saw earlier on in the forecast the New Zealand CAD setup, which is showing some New Zealand strength, and you notice New Zealand dollar has also been left out of the forecast this week. It's because the New Zealand is actually showing some strength. So very simply put, going into next week, any pullback in this market is going to be viewed as an opportunity to look for bearish reversals down to the next key of support to the downside and the target set at the 1.0420. So moving on to stocks and starting with the SPX. In previous videos and in last week's video, we're looking for a move into the 448583, and we are coming close to achieving this now. So for anybody not previously involved with the SPX, what would be preferable now we're approaching this is any pullback in this market would be viewed as an opportunity to look for bullish setups up towards the next target to the upside and the target previously set, the 448583. And if we can break through here, we're going to be looking up towards target 2 at the 4526.97. Next is the Nasdaq. Now, very similar to the SPX, we are approaching the target previously set, the 15236.09. Whenever approaching these targets, it does reduce the risk to reward opportunities. For example, the pullback in this area was the better opportunity to start to look for bullish setups into the 15236.09. And the same applies here. If you are not already involved in the Nasdaq, as we're approaching this target, any correction once again in this market would simply be viewed as another opportunity to look for bullish setups into the target set last week at the 15236.09. And once we break through here, we're going to be looking at target 2 at the 15378.31. Next is the Dow Jones. Now, ever since I highlighted the inverse head and shoulders breakout in the Dow Jones, we've been looking for a move into the 35604.55, and we took out this target finally to the pip in Dow Jones last week. So for anybody following the weekly Forex forecast, a really nice opportunity there in Dow Jones. Going into this week, I am still bullish on stocks, and with inflation coming down, with that disinflation we saw last week, this will ease some fears that the Fed is going to have to rush to taper or hike sooner than they would like. And as a result, this should put a cushion under stocks going into next week. Any continued pullback now in Dow Jones is simply viewed as another opportunity to start to look for bullish setups in this market. I'm going to be looking up towards the target set at the 36066.23. Next is the Nifty. Now, in last week's video, I was bullish on the Nifty and I was looking for further advances to the upside, and we took out the target at the 16438.80. Very simply put, going into this week, I am bullish once again on the Nifty. Any pullback is simply viewed as another opportunity to start to look for bullish setups in this market up towards the next target to the upside at the 16904.20. Next is gold. Now, last week I was bearish on gold and I was looking for a sell-off into the 1739.33 and then into the 1717.56. We did get this sell-off. This happened with a flash crash and we took out both targets to the downside. Because of the volatility in this market, the targets remain the same. Going into this week, I am still bearish on gold, especially as we have not seen the DXY rolling over. It is still making higher highs. So very simply put, this pullback is simply viewed as it currently stands as a correction in gold. Any bearish reversals in this market will be viewed as an opportunity to look for short setups down to the next key of support to the downside and the target set at the 1739.33. Next is silver. Now, in last week's video, we're looking for a sell-off into the 23.78 and the 23.26. We did take out these targets, very similar to gold. This happened in a flash crash. And for anybody following the process and the methodology we use in the weekly Forex forecast, it would have kept you out of being on the wrong side of this and possibly even being involved with this flash crash to the downside. So very simply put, going into this week, having taken out both targets last week, any pullback in this market, any move higher is simply viewed as a near-term correction, and going to be looking for bearish reversals down to the next key of support to the downside and the target set at the 22.60. And last but not least, we have Bitcoin. Now, previously I did switch my bias to being bullish on Bitcoin after the big sell-off, and we switched the bias, we got that nice rally to the upside, and I've been bullish on Bitcoin ever since. Last week I noted that it looked like we were coming in to take out 47044, which was the initial breakdown in Bitcoin, that big head and shoulders which saw the crash in Bitcoin recently. And we did finally take out this target last week. So again, a really nice move in Bitcoin in the weekly Forex forecast. Going into this week, I am still bullish on Bitcoin, as I said, and any pullback in this market is simply going to be viewed as an opportunity once again to look for bullish setups into the next key of resistance, the upside and the target set at the 52.911. The only thing to bear in mind is that the DXY is still bullish to neutral in the near term, and although I'm still bullish on Bitcoin, I would prefer to see the DXY rolling over to the downside to give more support to higher Bitcoin prices, as opposed to having a stronger dollar, which can put a little bit of a ceiling on any move to the upside in Bitcoin. But going into next week, I am bullish on Bitcoin, and I am looking for that 52,911 level next. So that is it from me for this week, guys. As always, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please let me know by liking, sharing and subscribing. A big thank you to everybody who does that on a regular basis. A big thank you to everybody who comments on the channel on a regular basis as well. I want to wish you all a fantastic weekend, and I want to wish you all the best in your trading next week. The only thing left to say is take care and don't forget to trade safely.